Well, listening to all of that here in the studio in London is Tony Blair, and Mr. Blair is going to be making a speech today in which he's going to call on the European Union and the British government to prepare for another referendum. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
First of all, when you listen to that analysis of what happened last night and you put it together with what's happened inside the Conservative Party in the last couple of days or so, are things changing in a way that it is becoming more clear what the final outcome is going to be?
Well, at one level, what's happening is absolutely predictable because, frankly, there was never any way that we were going to be able to go to the Europeans and undo the backstop. Because, by the way, a frictionless border between North and South of Ireland began as a British demand. It then became an agreement on the part of the European Union. And just to make the very obvious point, for the Irish Prime Minister, there's absolutely no way that he can concede on this. And the other Europeans aren't going to desert him. So at one level, what's happened last night was completely predictable. I think at another level, what's happening is that this is becoming such a big mess that it's obvious that Parliament here is at some point going to have to grip it. It's then going to have to run the different options, and there are different options. Her deal, a form of Norway, a form of Canada, or if there's no majority for any of those things, then you can go back to the people in a further referendum. And, at some point, the government is going to have to understand that facilitating that is actually its duty. Because if you don't do that, it would be absurd if Britain crashed out of the European Union without a deal in circumstances where the overwhelming majority of people don't want a no-deal scenario. And when, obviously, if you come to a choice between a referendum and no deal, it's clear whatever the British people voted for in June 2016, they didn't vote for crashing out of the European Union without a deal.
But how does it facilitate it? Because we heard David Lidington earlier in the programme saying we're going to take stock and come back to Parliament accordingly. Your old advisor, Philip Collins, writing in the Times today, says Mrs May might call a referendum after her deal has failed in Parliament. But in order to do that, of course, she'd have to have some Labour people on side in order not simply to lose a vote of confidence. Is that, do you think, the road she goes down now?
Well, I think it's perfectly possible for her to become, as it were, the facilitator and to say, look, there are various options. If we can't have a parliamentary majority for any of those options, then it becomes logical to say to the British people, Parliament's gridlocked, Parliament can't decide, and therefore we've got to go back to the British people to decide.
But she's got to get that through Parliament. How does she do that?
I think she can get it through Parliament because I think there will be a majority in Parliament in the end for a referendum if no other option of Brexit works.
But even if the Labour front bench remain formally against it, which of course they are at the moment.
Yes, but the Labour front bench, I think, are saying, their preference is a general election. But if a general election doesn't happen, then they are in favour of a referendum. And look, the problem with this, and it's very important to understand that Northern Ireland and the difficulties over Northern Ireland is just a subset of the fundamental dilemma of the negotiation. We've spent 4.5 decades in the EU. Over that time, we've been part of the economic structures as well as the political structures. There are commercial, trading, investment, corporate relationships that have grown up interlinked with the rest of Europe. The dilemma of the negotiation is that you either stay in step with Europe's rules, economic rules, in order to minimise economic damage. That's your pointless Brexit. Or you break free of Europe altogether, go your own way, make your own rules. But that's painful because you're going to disrupt all of those relationships that have grown up. And the real problem all the way through the negotiation is the government has been trying to find a middle ground. In other words, we have access to the European markets, but without abiding by the European rules. This has never been possible. And the only reason the Northern Ireland thing is even more acute is that, as I say, we gave this central demand that there should be a frictionless border between North and South of Ireland, and that can only happen if you stay in the economic structure.
You are saying this morning you think there will be a majority in the House of Commons soon for another referendum.
I think that will happen if it's clear that there is no majority for any one form of Brexit. Right. And you've got different options on Brexit, by the way, all of which are perfectly negotiable with the European Union, but they all fall into the category of pointless or painful.
On the other hand, they also fall into the category, those that take us out of the European Union, of being in step with that vote that was taken. that referendum that was held, what would you say to someone listening, as there will be many who say, hang on a second, I voted to leave the European Union. That we were told at the time that was the decision being made by us then. We made the decision. We must leave in one form or another. In other words, if you were to have another referendum, it should be between no deal or Mrs May's deal. The idea of putting Remain on that ballot is undemocratic.
So I would say two things to those people. First of all, the actual deal that she has come out with is a deal that those who most ardently supported Brexit do not think is proper Brexit. And so you've got different varieties of Brexit. It's not clear which one the country really wants. And secondly, I would say...
Well, choose between them then.
Yes, but secondly, I would say the real reason why we should have a further referendum is because we've had 30 months of negotiation. And let's be clear, we are in crisis mode on this. The government is a mess. Parliament can't agree. Our knowledge has been vastly enlarged of what leaving the European Union means. How can it be undemocratic to go back to the people and say, in light of all of this, in light of the fact that the Prime Minister actually can't even get her deal through Parliament, and rather than her putting her deal to the vote, she's been put to the vote. If you look at all of this mess, how is it undemocratic to say to the British people, OK, in the light of all this, do you want to proceed or do you want to stay? Well, now, I hope there can be an additional element to that, which is an agreement by Europe that if Britain is prepared to think again, then Europe is prepared to think again on those issues that underlay the Brexit vote, but also underlie much of European politics today.
When you look at Theresa May and you look at that performance yesterday and you look at her general demeanour at the moment, you're someone who has felt the pressures of this high office. What do you make of her?
Look, I think that, to be honest, one of the things in politics that I learned is that the flip side of someone's strength is their weakness. And, her strength is, I can't tell you how much I admire her just keeping on characteristic. It's, when you think of what she's been through in these last few weeks, I'm very admiring of that. The trouble is, should be that not going to find sort of imagination and creativity to get out of the hole she's in, because there's literally no point on digging. Coming one sort.
Imagination and creativity, they also have to come from the European side.
I think so, yes. And I think, one of the we're saying in the speech today is Brexit is a European problem as well. And I think sometimes the Europeans underestimate this. The way I see the world changing at the moment, especially with every month that passes, you see how dominant China is going to become as a power, not just America. And by the middle of this century, you'll probably have three giant powers, America, China, possibly India. In those circumstances, we need the West to stay strong, which means America and Europe together, and we need Europe to be strong. And Europe will be significantly weaker if you pull Britain out.
So what do they do? So what is the imaginative approach that they make, even at this late stage, to us, to Theresa May? We heard what they wouldn't do last night. Are there, for instance, do you think, changes in the way that immigration is regarded, freedom of movement is regarded, even at this late stage, that could make a difference?
Yes, I think that's absolutely essential. And as one senior European leader said to me just a short time ago, let's be clear, in the last 30 months, European politics has been transformed. The
But I'm just interested in practical terms then. Are you suggesting that on, for instance, freedom of movement, absolutely one of the essential pillars of the single market, that there should be flexibility, an approach to Britain that says, actually, we've thought about this and we might allow what?
Well, I think, yes, absolutely. And if you take freedom of movement and the whole question of immigration, this is an issue all over European politics today. So, yes, I think it would be sensible and right if Europe also responded. If Britain said, look, we are prepared to think again, Europe should step forward with a series of measures that would allow people in Britain to understand they've been listened to, and frankly, people across Europe to feel they've been listened to.
So that would be in return for a referendum. If we got to having the referendum and we were deciding whether to leave or stay again, you're saying the offer from Europe on freedom of movement should be a different one.
This is my optimal idea, if you like, that it's not simply a question of stay versus leave, but it's also a question of staying in and reforming Europe versus leaving.
Isn't that so unrealistic when you think of European politics? You just mentioned, people would have to go back to their own countries and say, we're still follow all these rules, but we're going to allow the Brits to do something different in order to keep them.
They wouldn't be saying they allow the Brits to do something different. They would be saying these issues to do with immigration are European-wide issues. And there are questions, for example, Europe has already, just in these last months, have agreed a series of measures that prevent people migrating from Europe and undercutting the wages of local workers. Now, that was one key problem.
So it would be a pan-European approach.
Of course, it would be a pan-European approach because these issues are pan-European. And, one of the reasons why it's so important Britain stays in Europe from a European perspective is that it's often been the British over the last 30, 40 years that have provided, the reality check for a lot of European politics.
I'm interested you make these points now. Are you hearing things behind the scenes then, that this is potentially on the cards?
I have no doubt whatever that if Europe thought that Britain was prepared to think again, they would do everything they could to accommodate Britain staying in Europe.
And no doubt based on real conversations with real people who are in a position to deliver that.
Exactly so, because in the end, I think for the European politicians who want to be honest about this, they don't wake up every day thinking about Brexit. If you're Macron in France at the moment, Brexit's not your number one priority. However, those leaders who take a step back and look at the broad sweep of history realise it's a profound mistake for Europe to pull the British economy out of Europe's single market, which is the biggest commercial market in the world, and pull British politics out of the political union, which is the most powerful political union in the world. In an era where we actually need Europe to be strong and capable, by the way, of partnering the United States in circumstances where, as I say, this rise of China will become, over the next few years, a very, very clear, visible fact to everyone. I think people in Europe understand that this is a big mistake for Europe. So at the moment, and up to now, they felt there's no way of avoiding this mistake. But if they thought there was, I think they'd go a long way to try and facilitate this, which is in our interest and in theirs.
I got to ask you finally, in the light of your own experience of these things, Theresa May seems to have made a promise to her own party not to stand in the next election or not to lead it in the next election. They do go wrong, these things, don't they?
Yeah.
Can you see ways in which it doesn't happen?
Funnily enough, on this, I think there is a way. This is such a sui generis situation. I mean, I don't think there's any situation quite like it that I've come across in politics. I think if she is able, and maybe this is her strategy, who knows, if she is able to be in a position where she guides opinion, so that she recognises she's not in sole charge of this and she can't just keep driving at this brick wall, but where she tries to sort of facilitate an outcome which has either parliamentary majority or majority in the country, then I think she will perform a great service for Britain. And I think she can do that. And that will secure her place in political history in a very benign way. And I hope even now that she and the people around her just take a step back and realise they are in a unique position to give guidance to this country, to get to the point where either Parliament comes to a consensus or a majority consensus on a form of Brexit, or if they can't, then the British people are asked to make their decision.
Tony Blair, thank you very much.
Thank you.